And we're back. You're listening to the Talkin' Boxing with Billy C show. Glad you could join us. I want to give a shout out to all of our ESPN radio listeners. Glad you guys could join us. And want to remind you guys to check out our website, www.billycboxing.com. And bang around the site. There's a lot of great places to go. And don't forget, the news on that site isn't just on the front page. It's on a section called Latest Boxing News, too. So check that out. And while you're at it, go into the book club and get yourself a couple of dozen copies of my book. Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet, is available right now at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Kindle, Nook, or if you want it signed, get it from BillyCBoxing.com. You can follow the directions there. And you can also check out all the columns of our writers on the right-hand side. And speaking of columns, joining me right now where you can find his column, Daxx Khan. What's up, man?
What's going on? You ready for the snow that's coming?
Is there snow coming? I didn't hear that.
That's what I heard early this morning. You know how quick the weather can change, but about 6 o'clock this morning I was up watching the news. They said by the end of the week we're supposed to have a nice big one, so hopefully not. But, you know, compared to right now, when I was just outside walking the dog a little while ago, compared to how this afternoon when I was outside, I think the temperature dropped about 15 degrees, so yeah, it's quite possible.
It's pretty cold, but the winds, man. Have you been getting the winds?
Yes. And that's what kills it, you know. My one car is a Toyota, and I was driving earlier on today, and you can actually feel the wind blowing the car. I mean, of course, not blowing it like I'm Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, but, you feel the car moving, and, that's how bad it is.
I like that little girl that that does the Toyota commercials. What's her name, Jan? I don't know. I noticed things like that. I can't tell you what I had for lunch, but I can tell you what her name is. We got 3 fights. I know... listen, January always starts off a little slow with boxing. I know this past weekend there was a couple of fights. But this weekend, there are some decent fights. I know, from your perspective, they were tough. But I know 2 of the 3 that you're picking are to talk about are really good ones, important. But before we get started, some of the fans actually think it's better for the sport to have these kinds of title fights. But the question is, are they going to be competitive? These 2 actually might be, but that's what makes you wonder,
They are good in one way because the sport has been a stalemate for a long time. With these titles that are out there and they're kind of separated, it is bringing a lot more action. We're actually getting to see a lot of these fighters who weren't having the opportunities to face off against one another because the division was held hostage, and not just the heavyweight division, several other divisions were held hostage by one guy. But now that some of these titles are open and they're available, it's better for the sport overall because a lot of these other fighters who didn't have the chance or there with a promoter who didn't have quite the pull that these other guys who had the titles did to get them that title shot, and they kind of lost. They didn't get the much needed exposure that they should have, and they were swept under the carpet. Now it opens things up a little bit everywhere. I was listening to Larry Hazard's segment from last week, I think it was, where Larry was saying stuff in terms of how the smaller promotion companies, they want a part of what's going on in boxing now. They want to come out there and make their name known, just like how the PBC is. And this is exactly what we're seeing, and that's why the sport is getting a resurgence beyond what's going on this free TV. Everybody right now is just trying to jump in there and get their name out and get their fighters out. And that's good for the sport overall, not only, in a financial sense, but, for these fighters as well who are out there training hard and they're not getting the big fights, whether they succeed or they fail, at least, they should be getting these fights. And unless there's a demand for them, nobody's going to put them on. Now that there's a demand for them, the sport is on nothing but the upswing.
But the problem, my point is that I think it's completely opposite. I don't think that the fighter, I don't think we're getting the fights. I think that what happens when the belts get split up is that you have all these mandatories coming out of left field, and now a fighter, in order to maintain his or her title, is forced to fight a mandatory against a fight that, like for example, the Triple G fight I was just talking about. IBF has given them until Tuesday to to get a deal done with Billy Joe Saunders. Otherwise, they're going to force him to fight Torino Johnson. Now, maybe that was all in the plan anyway, but the truth of the matter is wouldn't we all rather see a unification fight against Billy Joe Saunders versus Torino Johnson? You know that, and the same thing's going to happen with the heavyweight division. You know, Luis Ortiz is going to get this guy. Oh yeah, everybody's going to say, I want to fight him. They're ducking me. They're running. They're this. They're that. You know, we hear the same crap all the time, and you know, once it's in the sanctioning body's hands, you know, they're driving the bus, and sometimes they're driving it off a cliff.
I agree with you 100% there. On the other hand, if you want to look at it from a different perspective, these guys are, you know, things are being sorted out this way. You know, the boxing fans are becoming a little bit smarter, I believe, lately in terms of what they're seeing. You know, they are starting to notice, you know, these guys who are being hand-fed these mandatories that are not really deserving of it. And again, referring back to that segment with Larry Hazard, you know, you're talking about how not every fight has to be against, you know, these A-level guys. And, you know, I believe, in my opinion, with these fights happening, we're kind of creating a little bit of a pecking order here. You know, we're getting, you know, the top level, that next level, and then the bottom level. And then once these guys who are being put in these mandatory positions, you know, they kind of get put back into their place. The promoter has them set in a spot where, you know, look, I can't, you know, manipulate my guy into the spot. And now they are forced to match these guys up against somebody who is a little bit more competitive, a little bit more of their caliber. And it doesn't matter if you're a C-level fighter, a B-level fighter, or an A-level fighter. If the bouts are made correctly, the fights are going to be entertaining and competitive, and that's something the sport hasn't had in a while. And I think that is something, you know, maybe not in 6 months, maybe not in a year, but I think that is going to be the end result in these type of things. I hope so, anyway.
Yeah, I hope so too. So what do you got? What are we going to do first? You're going to start off with the worst first or the best first?
Yeah, we'll start off with the worst first because, you know, actually this is something that we're talking about. It refers to our conversation. You know, we're going to talk about the fight in London. You know, David Hayes making his return against Mark DeMori. The fight really has no relevance except for the fact that should David Hay win and do so impressively, despite being off for just under 4 years, he's going to become an immediate player in the division. It may sound crazy, but it's true. He's going to automatically become an immediate player in the division, and the excuses that are going to be made by those who follow him or by David Hay is the Klitschko's. Everything's going to be blamed on the Klitschko's, and that's why he wasn't able to get these big fights. And somehow he's going to find a way to blame Tyson Fury for why he was pulling out of those other fights.
Well, I mean, they were also going to blame that he got injured and all this other stuff, but
of course. But my point is, you know what? Now again, that these other things are open, David Hay is going to be an automatic player, and I truly don't think he'll go in there with Tyson Fury. But you know something? One of these other titles or somebody that David Hay go in there. Now, as for the fight itself, you know, David Hay. You know, the pros on him is he has amazing power and a finishing ability. He's also an underrated boxer who, because of his power, those skills are often overlooked. David Hay knows how to use the ring to his advantage. He knows that his chin has a few cracks in it, so he doesn't take unnecessary risk. When David Hay is boxing smart, using his jab, following it up with the big right hand, he reminds me very much of what heavyweights used to look like before the surgence of oversized heavyweights came out. And remember, David Hay started his career as a cruiserweight, and technically, as me and you spoke about the other day, and many times, you know, we've spoken about, cruiserweights are really what the heavyweights of yesterday used to be. So David Hay, even though he's an undersized heavyweight, he is, you know, what a heavyweight is supposed to look like, at least a heavyweight, you know, 10, 20 years ago. The cons on him is he's very inconsistent. With his career choices. One day he's ready to become the best heavyweight in the world. Next he decides he's going to retire. Hay has always had suspect stamina. He's not a fighter who ever got the impression that wants to dig deep at the times he needed it the most. The Klitschko fight is what made that really evident. Lack of ring time, added with more concern on being a celebrity outside the ring, makes me wonder how serious does David Hay take boxing since he moved to the heavyweight division, since he got this fame and he made some decent money. Across from him, you got Mark DeMori, very little known. You know, he's 31, 1-2, 26 KOs. That looks great on paper. The pros on him is, by looking at him, you would not realize that Mark DeMori is a pretty fast heavyweight. He likes to work the body and head in combinations. He's a volume puncher. He lets his hands go. He always does it in bunches. Mark rarely throws one punch at a time. The finish is always on his mind. He never goes in looking to make the fight last the distance. His name, mainstream fans don't know, even though he's had several European and minor titles. Best win on his resume is a draw. Best fight on his name on his resume is a draw against former world title challenger Alex Leopai. Cons, other than Leopai, who's beaten of note. In fact, his lone loss is against somebody you've never even heard of and you probably never will. He has a high KO percentage, but he doesn't have impressive power. I don't know how he trains, how serious he takes the sport. But, once he fought twice in 2 weeks, and within that time he gained 20 pounds. That's a lot of weight to gain in 2 weeks, whether or not 6 months. Like Demore, he has gaps in Demore has gaps in activity. In 12 years, he took off 2005. He fought once in 2007. Took off 2010, once in 2011. He's not a full-time fighter. In terms of opposition, despite all those wins and those knockouts, 6 of those guys were pro debut fighters. 2 of them never won a fight. 7 had less than 5 wins, and only 4 had better than a 50% winning percentage. His biggest career win was over Rob Calloway, a 43-year-old Rob Calloway, who already had 90 fights of wear and tear on him. This is embarrassing. Even for a fighter who has been off almost 4 years, I can see why this is being shown, from what I understand, like a Comedy Central type network over in the UK. And that's why David Haye's promoting the fight itself. My official pick is going to be David Haye. Though, Bill, I will laugh until milk comes out of my nose if Demore somehow manages to win.
The problem with the sport is fights like this, and the fact that a guy like David Haye, who was relevant in the cruiserweight division and then ultimately in the heavyweight division years ago, and the inability of promoters today, even though he's promoting it himself, to actually promote and introduce fight fans to new faces. Instead, we get a guy like David Haye who promotes himself, trying to sell tickets or whatever. But the sad part is, what's the incentive for all the young fighters who are out there and listening to their coach and doing all the right things and making the sacrifices in the hopes that they could get a shot, and they see a fraud in a sense, in a sense it's a fraud, the fraud idea that a guy could come out the way he is and immediately, should he get by Mark Demore this weekend, immediately get a shot at a title versus some young fighter who's been working his ass off trying to position himself. That's my hang up with the sport. I got to agree with you. I'm picking David Haye, but I too will laugh until milk comes out of my nose if Mark Demore wins. What's the next fight?
And that was the exact reason why I chose that fight, even though it has no significance, just because of the fact let's see if our prediction is right. He wins, and all of a sudden, he becomes a major player. Next one's going to be, the one in Brooklyn for the vacant IBF title. It's going to be Tsar Glazkov against Charles Martin. Tsar Glazkov, pros on him, solid amateur career. He won a bronze at the Beijing Olympics. Tsar is a well-rounded fighter in terms of fundamentals. He does nothing overly special, but he does everything well. As an amateur, he's already fought, some of these bigger names in the division, and I wonder why he hasn't fought some of these guys and kind of revitalized these rivalries, especially the ones against Kubrat Pulev. The cons on him is that entering his 7th year as a pro, Glazkov has yet to have a signature bout. Now, I'm not talking about, we know he hasn't had a title fight, but you know what? There's no win on his resume that stands out. You can't sit there and say anything about Tsar Glazkov that makes you, think twice about him as a future in the sport. There are a couple fights on there that, make you sit there and say to yourself, the judges were a little generous to him, mainly the Steve Cunningham and Derek Rossi fights. We see him have a hard time with smaller and aging cruiserweights. Glazkov seems happy just doing enough to get the win, even when he should step up the pace or change his game plan a little bit to make fights easier on himself than they should be. He seems content on just edging out the rounds. The guy across from him, Charles Martin, the pros on him, he's a big fighter with some genuine power. He's hungry and determined, and he's always in condition, so it seems. The cons on him is he had a late start in sport. He was still fighting as an amateur just under 4 years ago at age 25. Like Glazkov, he has no signature fights on his resume that stand out. The biggest names on his resume, besides Joey Duecto, are opponents like Rafael Zambunalov and Kirsten Manswell, guys there to make upcoming fighters look good. He seems very one-dimensional in his attack, usually the 1-2 combination, then he steps back, resets, and loads up again. We don't know about his conditioning. Even though he looks in great shape, he's never really been pushed. He's been the 10th once, and that was against Love, who because of his experience, managed to last there. And he's only been to the six twice against unnamed competition. This is a close call. My logical side says go with Glasgow because of the experience and better competition, pro and amateur. But I have a feeling Glasgow is being content on just doing enough to win. Martin's desire is going to be the factor here. I have to go with Charles Martin officially, no matter the winner. Unless they fight Tyson Fury right away, Bill, they hold a bogus belt. This title was stripped from the lineal heavyweight champion who never lost it and never had the chance to sit there and defend that in the ring. I'm embarrassed for anybody who holds this title, and they shouldn't call themselves a world champion. Tyson Fury is the heavyweight champion.
It's a tough fight to pick. Charles Martin, like you said, he's bigger, he's stronger. He hasn't had a signature fight. He looks like he should. I mean, all last week I predicted that Charles Martin, if he wins this fight, you're going to see a matchup between him and Deontay Wilder, so Deontay can get another belt. Or if Deontay gets pressured to fight Povetkin, which we all know he doesn't want to fight Povetkin, he's definitely trying to avoid Alexander Povetkin. Maybe he gives up the WBC belt and goes after Charles Martin. That's what I think they're all hoping happens. The opportunities for both Charles Martin and Deontay Wilder seem endless, at least short term, for them if Charles Martin wins. Like you, my conscience tells me to pick Martin because everything goes in his favor. However, every single time I've picked against Glasgow, I've lost. Glasgow does nothing. You and I were ringside for him. He fights up to his level of opposition. Sometimes he seems hurt. Sometimes he hurts his opponent. He does fight just to get the W, just like you said. But there's something about it, and I think that Charles Martin's lack of competition and experience against good fighters, and the fact that he's been coddled, I think Glasgow's going to come out on top. Although Glasgow may be looked upon as the favorite by some, I think he's the underdog, and I'm going with the underdog. I'm picking Glasgow in this fight, only based on the experience level and the fact that no matter what I pick for Glasgow, it's the opposite. So I'm going to pick him, and we'll go from there.
Next, we're going to go, with the big and the anticipated fight of the weekend. At least we're hoping it's going to be, what everybody's expecting it to be, and that's going to be the WBC heavyweight title fight between Deontay Wilder and Artur Szpilka. This is one of those fights that makes you wonder, could there be an upset? Considering Szpilka only has one loss on his record, and that's to Brian Jennings, and 80% of his opponents have been just as good or even better than Wilder's. Unlike many of Wilder's past opponents, Szpilka is not a guy who's going to be satisfied collecting a payday while being used as another showcase opponent. On the other hand, is the public, or we, kind of being fooled here by the record on paper of Szpilka? When you sit there and look at Deontay Wilder, the pros on him is the height and reach and obviously his power. Wilder is a fighter who has several aspects in his game you don't often see in guys his size. He can use his legs. He moves around the ring well. He's not a plotter like we see in oversized heavyweights. Wilder has a long jab that sets up his 1-2 combination. Almost always, that number 2 shot gets the job done. It may not happen the first time or second time it lands, but even more than once or twice around, and guys are going to go to sleep. At least 34 times they have. He seems to improve a little bit on certain aspects of his game in each outing. That tells me, while Wilder is already a world champion, he's a fighter who the overall, he's not the finished product yet. We see a little bit of polish on him every time he comes out. The cons on Wilder is, Wilder's improving and showing us different aspects of his game, and he might not be the finished product. Of course, there's no guarantee that the finished product is going to be much better than we're already seeing. Wilder has some bad habits ingrained in him because he has been able to get away with them for so long, mainly leaning back to avoid punches, and he only brings up that left to block counter shots. That's why we see him get caught with punches by smaller men who are in there as showcase opponents. Even showcase opponents will get the job done eventually. They all have been showcase fights more or less for Deontay Wilder. Not getting tested in the ring is never a good thing. I don't know how he's going to react when he really gets tested against somebody who is just going to continuously come forward. He has that bad habit of going back to the ropes voluntarily for whatever reason. I'm not sure. It's where he's most vulnerable. One day, that is going to allow opponent to land a big punch. I feel one of those is floating around somewhere, and waiting to derail the train of success Wilder's handlers and managers have built up for him. As a matter of fact, if Darnell Boone was a heavyweight, Deontay Wilder would have lost by now, no question in my mind. Across from him, you have Artur Spilka. The pros on him, he's a tough guy who means business in the ring. His amateur career sort of gets unnoticed, but he did reach the semifinals in the 2008 Beijing Games. He's awkward, and like many of his fellow countrymen, he's willing to go the extra mile if needed to get that edge inside the ring. While he's not what you would call an eye-catching fighter with his style, he is effective with what he does. Spilka's not fancy, but works hard once the bell rings. The cons on him is he's awkward, but not a hard guy to figure out. His chin is suspect as well. The best opponent on his resume is Brian Jennings, where he lost by TKO. In that fight, Jennings not only outboxed him, but when he pressured Spilka after the second knockdown, Spilka froze up, and his corner had to save him. Aside from Jennings, that stoppage, Spilka went down 3 times in his 2 wins against a lightly regarded Mike Mallow. I question his overall focus on the sport and what outside portions of his life affect his career or what might affect his training camp. If you remember, just as he got started, Spilka foolishly gets into a brawl at a soccer game, spends 18 months in jail. That's a major setback for a young fighter. If a soccer game can distract you when your career is on the rise, how much focus can get lost in camp when things aren't going your way, or you got all the lights in your face constantly, and your attention is totally drawn, and you're being brought into the moment. My official pick here is Deontay Wilder. While I don't think he is the best heavyweight by far, or even the second best in division, he is better at everything than Spilka is, anything Spilka can do, and it's so long he doesn't allow himself to get caught too often, and he's able to catch Spilka as he comes in. I think Deontay Wilder is going to make this a short night.
This is a tough fight for me. Because all right, I'm going to pick Wilder because I think that the points of Spitzka's weakest point is his chin, and I think he's going to get in there, and he's got the heart of a lion and everything else. I'm picking Wilder. However, I'll be rooting for Spitzka because I think that this kid is going to give Wilder a much tougher fight than we think, and I would love to be wrong on this one. I like Deontay Wilder, but there's something about him, and it's almost like, some fighters, unfortunately today, the misconception is you lose and your career is over and everything else, but some fighters benefit from a loss. Maybe Artur Spitska is one of those guys. He's now with Ronnie Shields. He does appear to have this seemingly frightening confidence that I've only seen a couple of times, and both times both of those fighters won. Like you, my official pick is Deontay Wilder, but I am the one that predicted an upset and thinking that don't be shocked come post-fight showtime when we're live that we're talking about an upset and how silly Deontay looked when he was sprawled out on the canvas, because Spitzka can do it, but for the challenge, I'm picking Deontay Wilder because, hey, it's the challenge.
Spilka doesn't work hard. Actually, I'm kind of mad. Well, I can't say, genuinely mad, but for the Wilder fight, there was a press day that was supposed to be at a gym in Manhattan, and I had went there, and on the way down, we had a horrible blizzard that day. And, driving through Manhattan with a blizzard, was awful. Driving through Manhattan at any point in time can be a pain in the neck. But that day was just horrible. Get to the gym and nobody showed up. And, so it's like, all right, I went to eat night, and I'm heading home. And then, Artur Spilka, what does he do? He ends up going there, and nobody else is around. So Spilka decides to go for a run throughout the city on his own. He's, just jogging through the streets. He's all bundled up, going for, a run on his own. He was really hyped up for the Brian Jennings fight. He really wanted that. So I think, he's a guy that, has that desire and has that want. But, he's got a couple chinks inside his armor. Mainly the chin, I think, and mainly the fact that, he just has that come-forward style. And that's going to be the biggest detriment for him inside this fight. If he kind of had, he's only 26. If he had more of a Andrew Golota type chin, I'd be picking him definitely. Well,
like I said, he's got Ronnie Shields now, and Ronnie Shields has had an up and down career as a trainer, but every so often the right trainer gets matched with the right fighter, and good things can happen. I think I think we're starting to see some changes with Spitzka. I thought he was very raw when he first came out. several years ago. So we're going to see. I hope Deontay's not taking him lightly, because if he is, we're both going to get L's on our challenge sheet, but we'll see, man. We'll see. And then it's going to be interesting to see what happens afterwards and what kind of excuses we hear, why Wilder's going to give up the WBC title rather than fight Alexander Povetkin.
I mean, if don't get me wrong, it's not out of the question. If a guy like Eric Molina is able to tag Deontay Wilder, Eric Molina, who is, I don't really think he's the quality fighter that Spilka is,
he's not.
Or Johan Duhaupas,
and
if they're able to land some good shots and actually rock Deontay Wilder a few times, if you notice when Wilder gets hit, he kind of freezes up. He gets he puts the one hand up, he kind of tries to do a little Floyd Mayweather type turn, and if these guys would let their hands go a little bit more after that, I think they put Deontay Wilder in serious trouble.
That's what,
and Spilka, I think he will follow
exactly.
up.
I agree. That was just going to say Spitzka will, and it's funny. Duhaupas. Could you imagine if Spitzka had Johan Duhaupas's chin? Remember his chin? That guy, what a chin that kid had. They stopped it to save himself from his own. He just could knock him down.
He did. Credit there. Everybody thought that was going to be a blowout, but yeah, he took some monster shots, and I think Deontay Wilder was wondering after the fifth or sixth round, is this guy going to lay down or what? I got to get a pillow. What do you got to do?
I know. It's wild, but Dax, great job as usual, and we'll be looking forward to you towards the end of the week. All right.
All right, absolutely. Everybody, have a great day. Try and stay warm this week, and I'll talk to you all soon.
All right, man. Take care. That's Daxx Khan. You can check out his column up on BillyCBoxing.com. I'm going to take a short break. When I come back, I got some news. We got the trivia question. We got the book. We'll be back in 2 to tell you the rest.